We are counting down the 25 British meals that carried poor families through the harshest winters. Dishes born from bitter necessity, forged in kitchens where coal was rationed and hunger waited at every door. From bubbling broths that warmed frozen fingers to hearty stews that stretched a few pence into a week's worth of suppers, each entry reveals the ingenuity and resilience of families who refused to let the cold win. These are meals that steamed up kitchen windows, filled empty bellies, and turned scarcity into survival. Which forgotten winter warmer claims the top spot? Let's begin our countdown with number 25. Number 25. Oxtail soup stood as the thrifty housewife's answer to the biting winds that howled through tenement streets. Butchers sold oxtails for mere pennies in the 1950s, often wrapping them in newspaper for families who could not afford the prime cuts displayed in the window. The tails, knotted with bone and sinew, required patience. Hours of slow simmering that transformed gristle into gelatin and tough meat into something yielding and rich. Housewives added carrots, onions, and a handful of pearl barley, watching the broth darken to a deep mahogany as the kitchen filled with a savory warmth that seemed to push back the draught seeping under the door. Children pressed noses to foggy windows, waiting for the call to supper, knowing that tonight there would be something hot and filling. The soup was ladled into chipped bowls, the marrow sucked from bones, and every drop of broth mopped up with bread. For families where meat was a luxury measured in ounces, oxtail soup was a small miracle, a meal that cost almost nothing yet tasted like care. Its disappearance from modern tables marks the distance between a Britain that wasted nothing and one that has forgotten the art of making much from little. Number 24. Stovies warmed the stone cottages of Scotland when snow piled against doors and the nearest shop was miles away. This simple dish of potatoes, onions, and whatever scraps of meat could be found, often just the dripping from Sunday's roast, was cooked low and slow until everything melded into a soft, comforting mass. By the early 1950s, potatoes remained one of the few foods not subject to rationing, and Scottish housewives stretched them further than anywhere else in Britain. The pot sat on the range all day, its lid rattling gently, filling the room with a smell that meant home. Miners returning from frozen pits, fishermen back from icy harbors, all knew that stovies would be waiting. Children fought over the crispy bits that clung to the pot's edges, browned and almost caramelized from hours of cooking. Oral histories from the Highlands recall families surviving entire winters on little more than stovies and oatcakes, the dish so central to life that its absence meant real hardship. Today, stovies appear occasionally at Burns night suppers. But the daily ritual, the pot always on, the kitchen always warm, has faded into memory, a reminder of winters that demanded everything and kitchens that gave what they could. Number 23. Scouse gave Liverpool its very identity, a one-pot meal so beloved that the city's people took its name for their own. In the cramped terraces near the docks, where families lived 6 or 8 to a room and work was never guaranteed, scouse was survival in a stew pot. Cheap cuts of mutton or beef, bought for shillings at closing time when butchers slashed prices, were simmered with potatoes, carrots and onions until the meat fell apart at the touch of a spoon. When money ran out entirely, families made blind scouse, the same dish without any meat at all, just vegetables and hope. The smell of scouse cooking was the smell of the city itself, drifting from every open window, mixing with the salt air from the Mersey. Dockers carried it in tin pails, eating it cold on the quayside when there was no time to return home. Mothers stretched a single pot across 3 days, adding water and potatoes to keep it going. The dish carried families through the Depression, through the Blitz, through winters when the wind off the river cut through wool and bone alike. Scouse was more than food. It was proof that Liverpool's poor could endure anything, as long as there was a pot on the stove and a family to share it with. Number 22. Faggots and peas appeared in butchers' windows across the Midlands and Wales, their dark, glistening surfaces a promise of cheap sustenance when wages ran thin. Made from pig's liver, heart, and lungs, the offal cost next to nothing, and faggots were the working man's meatball. They were bound with breadcrumbs and onion, wrapped in caul fat, and baked until the kitchen smelled of herbs and rendered pork. By the 1950s, a serving of faggots with mushy peas and thick gravy could be had for less than a shilling, making it the meal of choice for factory workers and mining families who needed fuel for grueling shifts. The dish was heavy, unapologetically so, designed to fill stomachs and stick to ribs through the coldest months. Children sometimes wrinkled noses at the liver's mineral tang, but hunger won every argument. Mothers served them on chipped plates, the gravy pooling around mounds of bright green peas. Fathers scraped every last smear from their dishes before heading back into the cold. Oral histories recall the ritual of faggot night, the anticipation and the satisfaction of a belly finally full. Today, faggots survive mostly in chip shops and supermarket freezers, their origins as the food of necessity all but forgotten. Number 21. Liver and onions sizzled in pans across Britain, filling kitchens with a smell that divided families as sharply as any political argument. Pig's liver, cheapest of all, cost mere pennies a pound in the early 1950s, making it the protein of last resort for households where every farthing mattered. Housewives soaked the liver in milk to temper its iron-rich bitterness, then fried it quickly with heaps of onions until both were tender and swimming in rich, dark gravy. The dish was served with mashed potatoes, the gravy poured generously to hide the liver's purplish hue from suspicious children. Ministry of Food pamphlets praised liver for its nutrition, urging families to embrace offal when meat rations were tight. Yet the taste was never easy. Diaries from the era record the weekly ordeal. An entry read, "Liver again." The children moaned but cleaned their plates. For many, the memory of liver and onions is inseparable from the memory of cold, of hunger, of making do. Its disappearance from most kitchens marks a shift in taste and fortune alike, a dish that sustained millions, now dismissed as the food of hard times. Number 20. Bread and milk was the simplest supper of all, given to children when cupboards held nothing else and the cold pressed against every wall. A thick slice of bread, torn into pieces and dropped into a bowl, was covered with warm milk and a sprinkling of sugar if any could be spared. In the 1940s and the 1950s, when rationing stretched family budgets to breaking point, bread and milk was often the only hot food a child would see before bed. The dish required no cooking, no fire beyond what was needed to warm the milk, and no skill, just the willingness to make something from almost nothing. Oral histories from northern mill towns recall mothers serving bread and milk with quiet apologies, promising better when payday came. Children ate in silence, spoons scraping the bottom of the bowl, the sweetness of the milk a small comfort against the chill. For some, bread and milk was a treat. For others, it was the taste of poverty itself. The dish has vanished from modern memory, replaced by cereals and snacks, but its legacy endures in the stories of those who survived winters on little more than bread, milk, and hope. Number 19. Barley broth stretched across the Scottish lowlands and the northern counties of England, a soup so thick and nourishing it could carry a family through the darkest days of winter. Housewives measured out pearl barley by the handful, adding it to pots of water, root vegetables, and whatever scraps of mutton or ham bone the butcher could spare. By the early 1950s, barley remained one of the cheapest grains available, and its swelling, starchy presence turned a thin broth into something approaching a meal. The soup simmered for hours, the barley softening until it threatened to absorb every drop of liquid, leaving behind a porridge-like mass that stuck to the ribs and silenced hunger. Children sometimes complained about the texture, the way the barley clung to their spoons, but empty stomachs rarely argued for long. Oral histories from rural communities recall the broth as a constant presence, the pot refilled and reheated throughout the week. Barley broth was not glamorous, but it was dependable, a dish that asked for little and gave much in return. Number 18. Boiled bacon and cabbage filled Irish and British kitchens alike, its salty, sharp aroma announcing supper long before the plates were laid. A joint of bacon, often the cheapest cut from the butcher's block, was simmered with a head of cabbage and a few potatoes until everything was tender and the cooking water had turned into a thin, flavorful broth. In the 1950s, bacon was one of the few meats regularly available, and families learned to stretch a single joint across multiple meals. The first night brought slices of hot bacon with heaps of cabbage. The next saw the leftovers fried with potatoes or tucked into sandwiches. Nothing was wasted. Children fought over the fatty edges, the bits that crisped and caramelized in the pan, while mothers rationed the lean slices with care. The dish was simple, even humble, but its warmth was undeniable. For families who had known real hunger, boiled bacon and cabbage was a sign that things could be born. That winter, however long, would eventually end. Number 17. Black pudding and fried potatoes anchored the breakfasts and suppers of northern England and Scotland, a combination so filling it could fuel a man through a 12-hour shift in the mills or mines. Black pudding, made from pig's blood, oatmeal, and fat, cost less than a shilling for a full ring in the early 1950s, making it the protein of choice for families who could not afford bacon or eggs. Housewives sliced it thick, frying it alongside potatoes until both were crisp and golden, the pudding's rich, iron-heavy flavor softened by the starchy sweetness of the potatoes. The smell of black pudding frying was unmistakable, earthy, almost primal, a scent that filled the kitchen and promised sustenance. Children who grew up with it recall the taste as both comforting and challenging, a food that marked you out as working class, northern, and unashamed. Today, black pudding appears on gastropub menus as a curiosity, but its origins as winter fuel for the poor are rarely mentioned. Number 16. Cheese and potato pie emerged from the kitchens of Lancashire and Yorkshire, a dish that demanded nothing more than the humblest of ingredients and a hot oven. Housewives layered sliced potatoes with grated cheese, adding a splash of milk and a scattering of onion before baking until the top was golden and bubbling. In the 1950s, cheese was rationed to just 2 ounces per person per week, but even this small allowance could transform a simple potato dish into something approaching luxury. The pie was served straight from the oven, each slice revealing layers of soft potato and melted cheese, the edges crisp and almost caramelized. Families gathered around the table, the warmth of the dish, a welcome contrast to the cold seeping through thin walls. Oral histories recall the anticipation of pie night, the way the cheese stretched in long strings as slices were lifted onto plates. For those who survived the harshest winters on little more than potatoes and thrift, cheese and potato pie was proof that comfort could be found even in scarcity. Mutton broth simmered in pots across Britain, its rich, fatty scent a constant presence in homes where lamb was too dear and beef a distant memory. Housewives bought scrag end or neck of mutton, the cheapest cuts, boiling them for hours with root vegetables and a handful of barley or lentils. By the early 1950s, mutton was one of the few meats regularly available outside rationing, and its strong, gamey flavor became the taste of winter for millions. The broth was ladled into bowls, the fat gleaming on the surface, the meat falling from the bone in soft, stringy shreds. Children learned to skim the fat with their spoons, using it to soften their bread, while mothers watched to ensure nothing was wasted. Mutton broth was not elegant, but it was enduring. A dish that could stretch across days, its flavor deepening with each reheating. Its disappearance from modern kitchens marks the end of an era when thrift was not a choice, but a condition of life. Number 14. Potted meat spread across slices of bread in kitchens where fresh meat was a rare luxury. Housewives and factory workers alike relied on the small glass jars, their contents a pinkish-brown paste made from finely ground beef or pork, seasoned with salt and spices and sealed with a layer of fat. In the 1950s, potted meat cost just a few pence per jar, making it the working man's answer to the cold. A single jar could stretch across several meals, scraped thin onto bread or toast, each bite a reminder of the meat it once was. The taste was salty, faintly metallic, and utterly distinctive, a flavor that divided generations. Children sometimes rejected it, but hunger had a way of changing minds. Oral histories recall potted meat as the taste of hard times, of winters when the cold pressed in and the cupboard held little else. Today, it lingers on supermarket shelves, but its place at the center of the working class table has long since faded. Number 13. Sheep's head broth tested the resolve of even the most determined housewife, a dish born from necessity in the hills of Scotland and Wales. Butchers sold sheep's heads for pennies, their staring eyes and yellowed teeth a reminder of where the meat had come from. Housewives scrubbed and split the heads, then simmered them for hours with root vegetables and barley until the broth turned cloudy and rich, the meat falling from the skull in soft, gelatinous strands. The dish was not for the squeamish, but for families living on the edge of hunger. It was a small miracle, a meal conjured from what others threw away. Oral histories from rural communities recall the ritual of sheep's head night, the careful division of cheek meat and tongue, and the children who learned to eat what was put before them without complaint. The dish has vanished from modern tables, its memory preserved only in the stories of those who knew what it meant to waste nothing. Number 12. Colcannon warmed the cottages of Ireland and crossed the sea to Britain, becoming a staple of poor households wherever potatoes and cabbage could be found. Mashed potatoes were folded together with shredded cabbage or kale, enriched with a lump of butter or a splash of milk if either could be spared, then served in great steaming mounds that filled the belly and soothed the spirit. In the 1950s, colcannon was often the main meal of the day, especially in households where meat was a memory and wages ran thin. The dish was simple, almost austere, but its warmth was undeniable. Children scooped hollows in the mound, watching the butter pool in the center before mixing it through with eager spoons. For families who survived the harshest winters on little more than potatoes and will, colcannon was comfort made edible, a dish that asked for nothing and gave everything it had. Number 11. Pannakelty belonged to the northeast of England, a one-pot dish that turned leftovers into a meal worth waiting for. Layers of sliced potatoes, onions, and whatever meat or corned beef could be found were stacked in a heavy pot, covered with stock or water, and baked slowly until the top was crisp and the layers beneath soft and yielding. Miners' wives made pannakelty on washing days, when the stove was already hot and time was short, leaving the pot to bubble gently while they worked. The dish required patience, not skill, and rewarded both with a supper that filled every belly at the table. Oral histories recall the smell of panna kelty baking, the anticipation as the pot was carried to the table, the scramble for the crispy top layer that everyone wanted but few could claim. Today, panna kelty survives mostly in memory, its place in the daily routine lost to faster, easier meals. Number 10. Champ-filled plates across Ulster and northern England, a dish even simpler than colcannon, but no less beloved. Mashed potatoes were studded with chopped spring onions or chives, then enriched with butter and milk until the mixture was smooth and flecked with green. In the 1950s, champ was often the only hot meal of the day for families where wages stretched no further than potatoes and a few pence for onions. The dish was served in great mounds, a well of melted butter pooling in the center, each forkful a blend of starch and sharpness. Children dipped their spoons, mixing butter through the potatoes with quiet satisfaction, while parents watched to ensure nothing was wasted. Champ was not a dish that inspired poetry, but it was the taste of survival, a meal that cost almost nothing and gave warmth when little else could. Number 9. Peas pudding clung to the northeast of England, a dense golden mass served alongside boiled ham or bacon, its earthy sweetness a perfect foil to the salt of cured meat. Housewives tied split yellow peas in a cloth, boiling them for hours until they softened into a thick, spreadable paste that could be eaten hot or cold, sliced or spread on bread. By the 1950s, peas pudding was a fixture in working-class kitchens, cheap to make and rich in the protein that hard labor demanded. The dish was served in great slabs, its color almost luminous against the gray of the plate, each bite dense and satisfying. Oral histories from mining communities recall the ritual of peas pudding night, the way it stuck to the roof of the mouth, the children who either loved it or left it untouched. Today, peas pudding survives in jars on supermarket shelves, but its place at the center of the family table has faded into memory. Number 8. Brawn, also known as head cheese, was the thrifty housewife's answer to the question of what to do with a pig's head. The head was boiled for hours until the meat fell from the bone, then shredded and pressed into a mold with the cooking liquor, which set into a firm, gelatinous loaf. Sliced thin and served cold, brawn was a winter staple in homes where nothing could be wasted. The dish was not for the faint of heart. Its texture was slippery, its origins unmistakable. But for families who had known real hunger, brawn was a sign of skill and resourcefulness. Oral histories recall the careful preparation, the pride in turning what others discarded into something edible, even beautiful. Today, brawn appears occasionally in traditional butchers' shops, but its place in the daily routine has long since vanished. Number 7. Rag pudding belonged to the mill towns of Lancashire, a savoury parcel of suet pastry wrapped around seasoned minced meat and steamed until the pastry was soft and the filling was rich with gravy. Housewives made rag puddings on baking days, shaping the pastry around whatever meat could be afforded, then wrapping each pudding in a cloth and lowering it into simmering water. The dish was cheap, filling, and utterly satisfying, a meal that could be made in bulk and reheated throughout the week. Children waited for their share, knowing that each bite would be dense with suet and savoury with meat, a reward for enduring the cold. Rag pudding was the taste of Lancashire itself, a dish that marked you out as local, working class, and proud. Its disappearance from modern kitchens is a loss felt most keenly by those who remember its warmth. Number 6. Tatties and herring. Sustained the fishing communities of Scotland and the northeast, a meal that cost almost nothing but delivered everything a hungry family needed. Salted or smoked herring bought for pennies at the harbour were served alongside boiled potatoes, the fish's oily richness cut by the starch of the tatties. In the 1950s, herring remained one of the cheapest proteins available, and families near the coast ate it several times a week, especially when the weather was too rough for other work. The dish was simple, even austere, but its flavors were bold, salt, smoke, and the faint sweetness of fresh potatoes. Oral histories recall the ritual of herring night, the careful picking of bones, the children who learned to eat fish before they could walk. Today, tatties and herring survive mostly in memory, their place at the family table lost to supermarkets and changing tastes. Number 5. Potato pie filled the ovens of northern England, a dish that asked for little more than potatoes, onions, and a handful of pastry. Housewives layered sliced potatoes with onion, seasoned with salt and pepper, and covered the lot with a simple crust made from flour and lard. By the 1950s, potato pie was a weekly fixture in homes where meat was a luxury and every penny counted. The pie was served hot, its crust golden and flaky, the filling soft and fragrant with onion. Children gathered at the table, eager for their share, knowing that tonight at least, bellies would be full. Potato pie was not glamorous, but it was dependable, a dish that turned the humblest ingredients into something worth sharing. Number 4. Cawl warmed the stone cottages of Wales, a broth so central to Welsh identity that its name became shorthand for home itself. Housewives simmered lamb or bacon with leeks, potatoes, and root vegetables, the broth thickening as it cooked until it stood somewhere between soup and stew. By the 1950s, cawl was the daily meal of farming families, eaten from wooden bowls with hunks of bread, the meat fished out and divided with care. The dish required patience, hours of slow cooking, but rewarded with warmth that reached every corner of the body. Oral histories recall the smell of cawl simmering, the way it filled the kitchen with promise, the children who returned from school knowing supper was ready. Today, cawl appears on restaurant menus as a nostalgic curiosity, but its place as the backbone of Welsh survival has faded into the past. Number 3. Cullen skink, the smoked haddock soup of Scotland's northeast coast, was the fisherman's answer to the bitter cold that swept in from the North Sea. Smoked haddock, bought cheaply at the harbour, was simmered with potatoes, onions, and milk until the soup turned creamy and the fish flaked at the touch of a spoon. In the 1950s, Cullen skink was a staple of coastal households, its smoky, salty warmth a comfort after long hours at sea or in the fields. The soup was ladled into deep bowls, served with oatcakes or bread, each spoonful rich with the taste of the sea. Oral histories recall the ritual of skink night, the way the soup seemed to push back the cold, the children who scraped their bowls clean and asked for more. Cullen skink survives today in Scottish restaurants, but its origins as the food of necessity are often forgotten. Number 2. Scotch broth stood as the great unifier of Scotland's cooking, a soup so embedded in daily life that its absence was unthinkable. Housewives built it from whatever was at hand: lamb neck, root vegetables, barley, and dried peas, simmering the lot for hours until the broth turned thick and the meat fell from the bone. By the 1950s, Scotch broth was eaten several times a week in homes across Scotland, its warmth a bulwark against the damp and cold that seeped through every wall. The soup was served in deep bowls, the barley swelling, the vegetables soft, the meat divided with scrupulous fairness. Oral histories recall the smell of Scotch broth simmering, the way it filled the house with hope, the children who learned that winter could be endured if supper was waiting. Today, Scotch broth appears in tins and on restaurant menus, but its role as the daily anchor of family life has faded from memory. And finally, in first place, pan haggis crowned the tables of the Northeast, a dish so simple and so satisfying that it became the emblem of winter survival itself. Layers of sliced potatoes, onions, and cheese were stacked in a heavy pan, cooked slowly on the stovetop until the bottom was crisp and the cheese melted through every layer. In the 1950s, pan haggerty was the meal of choice for families where meat was scarce and the cold relentless. Its warmth, a comfort that required nothing more than patience and a handful of humble ingredients. The dish was carried to the table still sizzling, each slice revealing golden layers of potato and cheese, the edges browned and almost caramelized. Children fought over the crispy bits, scraping them from the pan with eager spoons, while parents watched with quiet satisfaction. Oral histories from Durham and Northumberland recall pan haggerty as the taste of home, a dish that marked the difference between hunger and hope. Its memory lingers in the stories of those who survived on little more than potatoes and will, proof that comfort could be conjured from almost nothing. Across all 25 entries, from the humble oxtail soup that opened our list to the triumphant pan haggerty at the very top, these forgotten British meals tell a powerful story of survival, thrift, and ingenuity. Some dishes, like sheep's head broth or brawn, stand as the most striking reminders of how far families would go to stave off hunger, while others, such as coal cannon and Scotch broth, reveal how warmth and comfort could be coaxed from the simplest of ingredients. The common thread throughout is resourcefulness, stretching every shilling, wasting nothing, and turning scarcity into tradition. Potatoes, barley, and cheap cuts recur in nearly every entry, underscoring how necessity shaped the national palate. This ranking is not just about what disappeared from our kitchens, but what these dishes represent: the resilience of working-class families and the deep cultural memory woven into every steaming pot and pie. In the end, these 25 lost meals are more than recipes. They are the taste of a generation that endured, adapted, and, against the odds, found moments of warmth around the table when the winter winds howled outside.